It's always a party at Patchworks. Let's get this party started. Hi, this is Julie from Patchworks, and we're here with another patchwork party. Today, we are going to be sewing the Morning Blend Quilt As You Go Table Runner. We're going to be using some beautiful heritage fabric from the 10th anniversary collections for a Cause fabric line and putting it together into this absolutely amazing table runner. Look at this. To get started, what you need is a Quilt As You Go pre-printed batting that includes the pattern on it. This is called the Morning Blend. You're going to need some beautiful fabric and some things that are going to make your project a little bit easier are the walking foot for your sewing machine. In case if you've never seen a walking foot has feed dogs on the top. And what this does is it helps feed through the fabric as it goes through the machine to help everything with these thick layers go through a little bit easier. We're also going to use some spray-based. And spray-based is a spray-on aerosol that has some adhesive in it. And we're going to use it to hold the batting to the fabric batting. So it will go through your machine a little bit easier. We will also need some basic sewing supplies like your rotary cutter, scissor, pins, those types of things. So to get started, we are going to open up the batting and take a peek inside. So I've already opened up one of our battings. And inside we have some wonderful instructions. And the instructions, I don't know if you can see this here, but this has a general layout and cutting instructions as well as your construction instructions. I'll be walking you through some of the cutting, but as we go through when you're actually making it, you will want to pay a little bit of attention to how that's being put together. Pre-printed batting is screen printed onto 80-20 batting, so that's 80% cotton, 20% poly. And the purpose for this is to have fabric positioning lines. Often when we see lines on quilting patterns, on foundation patterns like this, they would be sew lines, but these are actually going to be positioning lines, and you'll see how that works as we go through the project. The piece of batting that it's on is a little bit oversized, and so before we do anything with it, we do want to trim it down a little bit. You want to leave about 2 inches from the edge of that outside solid line so that you have enough things to work with, and then after you're done piecing the whole project, you'll be trimming it up to that solid line. I once again have trimmed it up so that we didn't have to do it right in front of you here, and we'll be using that for when we baste this on. With the fabric that you have, we need to make our center squares and some strips. I'm going to go over and get those pieces. I've taken some of the darker pieces, and with these strips here, I have cut them into different sized pieces. You could cut them longer, but because we're doing this log cabin shape that goes around, we want to make sure that they are cut to length so that we don't have to trim them off later. I fussy cut my center square that I'll be using. This is a 5-inch square. If you're using fussy cutting fabric, it's the size of a charm square. And we have a square that we need to be cutting in half diagonally to be making triangles like this. And if you've never done that, because I know it can be a little bit of intimidating to be cutting triangles, you start with a square. So here I went ahead and I cut an 8.5-inch square for us. And I'm going to show you how I easily cut a square into 2 triangles. So I have my ruler and my rotary cutter. And I am going to line this up. You want to make sure that you don't cut anything else. So you don't want to cut your table runner, that would be bad. And I am going to take the 45-degree line on my ruler here. I'm going to line it up point to point. See that? I'm going to take my rotary cutter and I'm just going to cut. And I have perfect triangles that I can use for corner triangles for my table runner. You'll be doing the same thing with a larger square to be making the squares that you'll be using on the other part of the table runner. So we have all of our fabric cut, and now we're ready to prepare our batting for sewing. So I'm going to set this aside here. And now I'm going to lay out my backing. This particular table runner, it finishes 48 inches long, which is a little bit longer than a width of fabric. So you can either piece together fabric, or if you decide you want to make two, go ahead and get 1.5 yards of fabric that you're going to cut in half on the fold. This is what we did here. And look at this beautiful bird fabric. Oh, I just love it. We're going to lay everything out, and you want to make sure that your surface on this little space that I have here, it is a little bit smaller, but you want to make sure that you have an ample table that you're working with. And we're going to grab our batting that we're going to be using. So as you can see, I trimmed to size this batting. I'm going to flip it wrong side down for me to spray. And when you're spraying this particular aerosol product, you want to make sure that you're using it in a well-ventilated area away from anything that you wouldn't want to get some sort of overspray adhesive on. So you want to make sure not to do it right by your sewing machine or something. So do as I say, not as I do, okay? All right, so we're going to spray here. And I'm making sure to get every nook and cranny here. We want to make sure it stays secure. Now let's just say you don't have spray adhesive, but you really should. But let's just say you didn't, or you're allergic to it or something. What you'd want to do is make sure you do very, very good pin basting. So I flipped this over, and as I adhere it to the back, I need to be really, really careful to just pat this down from the center going out. We want to be really, really careful to not stretch this, okay? If we stretch it, the fabric placement lines aren't going to be very effective. All right, so this is all patted down. Now we're ready to place some fabric. Okay, we're going to bring our fabric right over here. And remember I told you these were fabric placement lines? So we're going to start with the number 1, and that is a 5-inch square. So we're going to flip over to our fabric that we had all set up here. And this is the fabric number 1 that's placed right in between these lines. That was easy enough. If you wanted to, since this is a larger piece, you could even hit it with a little bit of spray based so it can stick into place. Then we're going to take our fabric 2 and fabric 3 and pin them in place. So I chose this really nice paisley, and I'm going to position it right here, and I need to grab my pins, and I am going to pin it perpendicular to where I'm sewing. Okay, 3 pins should do it. While this is a quick and easy project, we still need to practice some good sewing skills so that this stays together and so this lays nice and flat. All right. So we have our first pieces of fabric laid, and you see here, because we're working on opposite sides, we could go ahead and pin 2 pieces down right away. so that we can be more efficient at the sewing machine. So we are going to head over and sew these two seams. We're over at the sewing machine and we have our walking foot on, and the color thread that we're using is going to blend really, really well with this backing fabric that we have. I chose a beautiful golden kind of camel color, I like to call it. So we're going to be sewing a 1/4 inch seam, starting right at the edge of the fabric. Going to line it up, put my needle down, and then I'm going to sew. No back tacking is required. You want to make sure not to sew over those pins. I'm going to slide it out with my thumb. And you can see this walking foot does a really, really great job at helping muscle that fabric through. You notice I'm not back tacking here. I'm going to put my needle up, take my pins away, and then I'm going to trim my thread, okay? If you have one of those fancy machines that does an auto cut, you can go ahead and use that. I like to just use my handy dandy little scissors here. And then we're going to position to the other side. So if you had wanted to, you could go ahead and use the other side of your foot, okay? So you can become like this ambidextrous sewer. And we're going to use the other part of our walking foot here for our 1/4 inch guide, and we're going to sew using the left side now. Okay, needle down, and we're going to go. It's a little bit easier to take the pins out when they're right on the right side here, and I'm right-handed. And we're just going to continue through, and we're going to go right to the end. All right, needle up, and we're going to take the fabric out of the machine and trim again. Now that we've trimmed, we're going to bring it over to our cutting table and finger press them. We're going back to the cutting table, or to our cutting table here. And if we press this up, we can see how this comes up. What I've done is I have sewn some other samples here already that have brought us to the next round, so you can just keep going around the log. And let's show what that looks like. So this one here is sewn all the way around, and now we're ready for the corners that come on here. So I'm going to grab my corners to place on. These are the corners that we cut from our 8.5 inch squares. And the reason why I wanted to show you sewing this on is because sewing a triangle on can be a little bit harder than just sewing a straight line. The reason why it's a little bit harder is that this diagonal cut here is a bias edge. And so that means it can stretch. So I'm going to show you here. It can stretch kind of like this. We don't typically want to stretch it. We just want to leave it nice and flat. Okay, we're going to line this up and we can pin. Sewing through all these layers is really nice. One of the things with sewing through all the layers is it does have extra stability when you're sewing on the bias stretch. And as you're piecing this Quilt As You Go project, I don't know if we talked about this earlier, but you're quilting it as you're piecing it. So after you're done going all the way to the outside edge, you are totally ready to just trim it up and bind it, and boom, you're ready to go. Okay, and once again, we're going to go opposite ends again, right? Because there's no reason why we can't take full advantage of being at our sewing machine and just sewing. So here, we're going to do this, and you probably don't need to watch me sew all of this through. The big key here, as we're lining this up, is that you can see the fabric goes off the edge, and we pin. Sound good? Okay. We got our middle section in, and I told you you didn't need to watch me sew this whole thing together. One thing I do want to point out is that as we go on the outside edge here, and we can just look at the one that we've finished here, we would line this up, and then it lines up and goes finish, and then we just continue with a braid that goes all the way out. After you're done with everything, you trim it up and bind it like you would a normal quilt. On the back side here, you can see all these beautiful lines. It's a beautiful design. It could be a reversible piece. If you had wanted to, you could use some extra stitching to embellish it. However, every piece that I make, I just use the lines of the quilt lines that for piecing them together, and I don't worry about adding anything extra. In this particular sample, we made everything super matchy as it went around. Feel free to make it scrappy. You can also change up your fabric placement and even have this look like a chevron coming out. Just so much flexibility that you could work with it. Something, if you really wanted to mix it up, you could even do it where you'd match like your quilt that you'd be making. So you can have a matching table runner for your quilt. And you could take your favorite quilt block and actually position that in the center and then continue to quilt around it. So I hope you enjoyed learning about this table runner. I think it's super fun, super easy. It is a little bit more challenging than some of the other Quilt As You Go projects that are available, but I think that if you have a little bit of practice, this will really give you confidence with sewing some more advanced shapes. If you want to make it just like Julie, we do have some fabric packs available, and we have a table runner in a box project for this beautiful collection. We want to make this project as fun and easy for you as possible, so we have gone ahead and put together a table runner in a box just for you. Included in our fun table runner in a box is the Quilt As You Go pre-printed batting, the morning blend pattern, all of the fabric that you need to make it just like Julie. And that does include the beautiful bird fabric that you can use not only for your quilt back, but to fussy cut into the center of that table runner. And of course, you are going to need the beautiful camel thread that matches the fabric perfectly. All of this is available in store or online if you just wanted to click the link below. I hope you had fun at this patchwork party, and I can't wait to see you next time. Happy quilting!